But it's time and we have a quorum. Please return to your seats so that we can start the next session. Those who have signed up, that is, individuals and deputations, we'll ask them to come in. We still have names of members that have previously pressed the button. For others who would like to speak, please press the request to speak button.
團體代表係入緊嚟㗎嚇。
Deputations and individuals are coming in.
OK。歡迎各位。
Welcome, deputations and individuals, for attending this public hearing. Let me remind you all that if you need simultaneous interpretation service, please put on the earpiece. Channel 0 is the floor, Channel 1 is Cantonese, Channel 2 is English, Channel 3 is Putonghua. You each have 5 minutes to speak. The timer here will sound at the end of 5 minutes to remind you that your time is up. Please pay attention that what you say and what you state in your submission will not be covered by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. Also, please pay attention to the paper table titled Note for Members of the Public Attending Meetings in Conference Rooms or Observing Meetings in Public Galleries in the Legislative Complex. Please be reminded to abide by the rules. Do not shout, do not chant slogans, and do not display any slogans. If you have a submission or speaking notes, please write your name on it and give it to our staff members before you leave the room. That will be used for members' reference. We now have Mr. Ronald Yip. You have 5 minutes. Am I coming through? Good morning, everyone. I am a member of the planning sector. I support the legislative amendment. I have two points to make. First, the proposal has retained public consultation and it has protected the right to make representations. At the same time, it has compressed the time required for plan making. It has struck a balance. However, I think that since there is time saved from public consultation, you have to make sure that the rights of people from the area will be protected. You have to step up publicity. Hong Kong people lead busy lives. They don't really have time to pay attention to government notices posted on a notice board, or they will not have time to browse the town planning, the planning department website. I do think that there should be APIs broadcast. This will be for the information of the general public that there will be upcoming public consultation. This ensures public participation. The current government adopts an approach of result-oriented. I suggest to the government that in relation to environmental impact assessment reports and regarding departments, say the Environmental Protection Department or the Drainage Services Department, there should be a time set for them to respond, not a suggested time. Where there is a time specified for the examination of the plan. This will give an idea to applicants how much time it will take for government departments to respond, so that they will have a general idea about the time it will take. This will also enhance the use of resources. And these are my suggestions. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yip. Next, we will hear from Mr. Fong Wai Hong. Thank you. This amendment focuses on streamlining procedures, compressing timeframes, boosting land supply. I support this move. Home prices are going up. People's income fall way behind rises in home prices. We had caged homes and now we have subdivided units. Many people on the wait list for public rental housing. The wait list is 5.5 years now. Housing issues are a core issue in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government owns the land. Fixing the housing problem can be done through the use of land. But then undeveloped areas make up 70% of Hong Kong's size. But then there are all kinds of factors, a complex development procedure, etc., and a lengthy processing time. Take Hutong North and Fanning North as an example. The feasibility study was done in 2007, and then 2021, the first spade-ready site came on stream. That took 14 years. And we haven't included the time for the housing to be built. For the Kai Tak development area, 1998, the Kai Tak airport was decommissioned. More than 20 years later, the construction works are still going on. At the root of the problem is land. So there's a pressing need to boost land supply. I think in the 5 directions set out under the bill, the first one, streamlining procedures, compressing the statutory timeframes. I hope the government can have due regard to public views and allow a reasonable level of public participation. Balancing all these factors, the government needs to achieve all those targets while striking this balance. And second, taking several measures forward in parallel. That's how we can shorten development procedures. Finally, I hope that this amendment bill can be passed quickly and implemented. We need to boost land supply to meet the people's housing needs. And we also need to seize the opportunities for Northern Metropolis and Lanta Tomorrow, both being mega infrastructure projects. Next, we will hear from Mr. Ko Chi Pil. I speak in support of this amendment bill. Some comments from me. In approval procedures, can we have several processes go ahead in parallel? This amendment is about streamlining procedures and compressing timeframes for environmental impact assessments or work involving the Lands Department. The approval time is very long. Some drags on for 3 or 5 years. For larger projects, the time is only longer. So for statutory approval procedures, there has to be a limit on how long a certain process can take. We talk about KPIs, key performance indicators these days. So the same should apply to approval processes. There should be a time limit on approval. the same applies for rejection. Rejections should come with reasons for that. That's how you can get greater transparency. The second point, in the new territories, there are developments that go against the rules or illegal occupation of sites. I hope that through this amendment exercise, the planning authority can get enough power to terminate the use of illegal uses and also instill prosecutions and also stiffen the fines so that land being used illegally can be resumed, and that's how the government can make better use of the land resources. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mr. Nip Hin Ming from the Kaduri Farm and Botanic Garden. Good morning, everyone. I'm from the Kaduri Farm and Botanic Garden Corporation. We have been involved in many town planning processes. Every year, we comment on over 100 town planning applications. In total, more than 1,500 over the years. We also commented on many land use zoning plans. We took part in many hearings. Many of our representations were accepted by the Town Planning Board. We have some comments on the proposed changes to the Town Planning Ordinance. Let's start with the Section 12A applications. Removing the public consultation procedure for Section 12A applications. It's only after the TPP accepts that amendment and then we have the consultation. Section 12A applications deal with rezoning a certain area. That move may have a huge impact on the environment in the area. The government is saying the processes take too much time, so we want to shorten the time it takes. So our proposal is let people submit Section 12A applications. Can we let those people attend the hearings without having those people submit another round of comments? For those who didn't submit their application, Section 12A applications, let them have another round of representations. Environmental or other impact assessments are involved in Section 12A applications, but people may differ on those assessments. After the TPP already accepts a certain amendment, is it even possible for other parties to get in their applications or representations? Now I want to turn to who gets to attend those hearings. Now, the proposal says that only landowners get to attend. We have seen successful cases when members of the public submitted rezoning applications for government land. Will those people get such chances in the future after this amendment goes through? Sure, the proposal says people can obtain the consent of the Director of Land, but how does this mechanism work? Can the government clarify how an average person or for people like us, an organization, can get the consent? The government proposes to skip certain rounds of representations and comments, but then all the existing rounds of representations, comments, further representations, and then after the amendment, we have another round of representations. Madam Chair and other legislative members, I draw your attention to page 4 of my written submission. That has to do with a Tongchong project. That's a lengthy process. That project takes a lot of time. There's a concurrent change or proposed amendment to the Environmental Impact Assessment Ordinance. On page 4 of my written submission, Secretary for Development directed the board, the Town Planning Board that is, and then 8 months later, the public inspection happened. but the public inspection only took 2 months, and then factor in another 3 weeks for the comments. So can we put the inspection and the commenting in the first stage? Can we have all these things start in parallel so that we have the same steps, same participation? So instead of cutting certain things out, we are taking forward several steps in parallel. Now, we actually support some proposed changes. Say, when applicants want to review, they need to set up their grounds. Say, the people put in a one-pager and requests a review. We agree that allowing this leads to a repetitive process. We also support the attempt to end an endless round of review requests. We also support the idea of a regulated area. But we want to see the idea of regulated areas be applied to not just the areas under development pressure. You can never estimate the pressure of development. I will stop here. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mr. Stephen Wong. As a member of the community, I have heard the government talking about the need to boost land supply. Last year, the chief executive and various bureaus and departments mentioned housing issues. Many measures have been taken forward. Land and housing are priority matters. There's a need to boost quality, speed, efficiency, etc. This is more than a slogan. This needs to be implemented. So now there's this proposal to amend 6 ordinances. In fact, the proposal was first made in June last year. I support this amendment, but I have some comments. First, we need to have this amendment enacted quickly. And once passed, this bill should be applied to ongoing projects, though I acknowledge there may be difficulties. And third, during implementation, the government needs to talk to various parties, stakeholders. We need to sort out the priority of things in taking forward the project. The time frame for submitting the plans to the Chief Executive and Council will be shortened from 9 months to 5 months. I propose that a task force be set up to explain to various parties how the mechanism works to speed up the implementation. We need to overcome these constraints before we can boost housing supply. We need to get started with land to address the housing issue, because that's a critical part of the process. And we need to outrun our problems. We need a long-term plan for land and housing supply. I will stop here. Thank you. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Ms. Wong Sut Mei from the Hong Kong Bird Watching Society. Good morning, everyone. Before we get into our submissions, I want to say that China is a member nation of the Convention on Biological Diversity. In fact, that is made a national priority, so Hong Kong is under a duty to implement this convention. Since 2011, the Hong Kong Bird Watching Society has launched a report on monitoring how Hong Kong fulfills the obligations under the convention. We have made a summary. Over the past 10 years, out of the 20 targets, Hong Kong only met 6 of them partially. A major problem is the town planning ordinance. We have been keeping an eye on the projects under the TPO. For farmland and greenbelt sites, the sites are under or have been under enormous pressure. This amendment has to do with the number of ordinances. So our organization would like to comment on the town planning ordinance. Just then we heard from the Kadui Farm. We also heard from the Conservation Association. We want to focus on two amendments in particular. First, Section 12A applications. There's a reason we want to focus on this point. Some public consultations will be removed under the proposal because the government thinks there is duplication with subsequent consultations during the plan-making process. In Deep Bay, for example, we have wetland preserves and also wetland buffers. There are rezoning applications going on through the Section 12A mechanism. Applicants want higher building height or higher intensity for their development projects. There have been more than 20 such applications over the past 10 years, so those sites are under pressure. We have been commenting on these rezoning applications, and we have made this observation. The applications take so long because the applicants failed to provide all the information, especially information on the ecological impact assessment. Some information was missing. They needed more time, that is, the applicants needed more time to provide the information to meet the very basic requirements. Without the public consultation in the town planning process, we or other members of the public don't get to comment on those information, on those documents. If this amendment goes through, then we won't get to comment on the information on the impact assessments until very late in the process. What happens if some documents turn out to be missing? Will the applicants be asked to submit their application from scratch again? Doesn't that go against the government's goal of enhancing the process and streamlining procedures? There are difficulties to be resolved. Without the 12A public consultations or Section 12A consultations, what kind of information will be required from applicants? Once a Section A application goes through, will there be a limit on when the plan making has to happen? Even when Section 12A applications go through, the plan making doesn't happen right away. It may take years before the plan making happens. Now I want to turn to some loopholes in the enforcement. We actually support the proposed changes. Sites of high ecological value will be turned into regulated areas. In fact, we believe for conservation areas in rural areas, we need to see enforcement actions to plug loopholes. Sorry, your time's up. So I will stop here. You can refer to our written submission. Next, we will hear from Mr. Yim Wai-Kung. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Electrical, everyone. This is an amendment exercise covering 6 ordinances to streamline procedures, shorten statutory time limits, taking forward measures in parallel. I speak in support of this amendment because the move can shorten the time it takes. For CAP 131, that is Town Planning Ordinance, in one of the parts about plan making, I agree with the government's proposal. We should simplify the representations to boost the efficiency of the process. In speeding up the approval of amended draft plans, I have some ideas. For the outline zoning plans, that is the draft, my proposal is that if the plan is not controversial, we should do approval in procedure so that the Development Bureau can take forward urban development quickly. Second, if you have a plan that's controversial, and once you get to the detailed design stage and then you proceed with the amendment, these two proposals, if adopted, can allow the uncontroversial parts to go ahead more quickly. This can also help prevent a situation where the applicant provides information in a piecemeal fashion, causing delays. Finally, I believe this amendment proposal is sensible. This can remove barriers and help the public take part in the focused discussion. This will also facilitate professional judgment. This proposal will help address the deep-seated housing issues. I speak in support of the proposal. Thank you.
咧就係自由黨發
Thank you, Mr. Yim. Next, Mr. Henry Ng, Liberal Party Development and Construction Industry Concern Group Deputy Convener. To expedite the process of turning primitive land to spade-ready land, the original intent is indeed very good. Removing red tape is a point. The bill covers 6 ordinances to be amended, and I would like to focus on the 3 main points on the Lands Resumption Ordinance for the current bill. The mechanism of adding the objecting views will allow more people to have their voices heard. 2 plus 5 is also introduced with reference to Bill 2B and 2D. 6 days afterwards, after they get settled, they will have to submit a written objection. Do they know that the notice has already been affixed in the area? How can they make sure the landowner or the land occupant has indeed received the relevant notice? As I said, how do we define that we are individuals with the relevant rights in the land? Could a short-term tenancy suffice? For someone outside of Hong Kong, how can we deliver the notice to that person if they are out of the jurisdiction? For the newly added 16AA, that is the resumption of land. It allows the resumption of land for a particular public use. I do not see any time limit, however. As long as you have resumed land, they can, without time frame, use the land. The provisions also say that the CE in Council hold the view that the plot of land can be changed in relation to its use. While the change may not be a major one, the public may think that there is room for improvement in relation to the bill. Is it possible for us to, in the guidelines, to allay the concerns of the public? For example, to be concrete, 3 years, 5 years, so that when they have a better understanding of the picture, they will apply. A compensation can be disbursed before a project a public works project is approved. So what about when the project is not given approval for the funding, although it is not likely? The original intent of the legislative amendments are good. We would like to expedite the legislative amendments, streamline the procedures, and to avoid repetition of procedures, and we can also take forward infrastructure development. Thank you. Next, Mr. Chang Chonglang, Chairman of the Hong Kong Federation of Development Professionals. I am Chairman of the Hong Kong Federation of Development Professionals, Mr. Chang. Thank you. Thank you for allowance to speak. Hong Kong is a mature community in private and public projects. From planning to land policy to construction of houses, if it involves public interest, there will also be gazebo as well as public consultation to tap into public views. Well, I think that this system is a system in which Hong Kong can take pride. It is difficult to find a similar practice in neighboring places, allowing Hong Kong to take part in the process. The reason we can see right now is that some processes are too mature to the extent that they are too rigid. Some functions cannot be performed because of the too ossified situation. The bill covers town planning, land use, etc. Well, I think that this is a major step forward. On development, there is still a very important buildings ordinance. In the future, the administration should also work on the legislative amendment of the building ordinance. It has been so long. Some were written in 1950s. By and large, I agree with the legislative amendments. Some members already said that the further consultation should be dispensed with. They should be combined into one. I agree with this. Well, the administration can even take bolder steps to reduce 2 months to even 1 month. If the objection involves reason in relation to compensation, it will not be an effective one. We agree with this as well, as there are other mechanisms to deal with compensations. You can also consider making public the information of the stakeholders, as they have a stake in the project as well. They are not somebody outside the scope of the projects in question. I also came to notice that the Secretary for Development will have the delegated power from the Chief Executive to exercise some particular powers. I agree with this as well. If all of the decisions have to go through the ranks to the highest echelon of the government, it will take a very long time. And I think that the Secretary for Development will have sufficient experience to handle all these. If some plans cannot be approved in one go, can parts of the plan be approved first so that some are partially approved? But I do not understand that. What do you mean by partial in terms of area? Or what? Which part will be deferred, which part will be approved? Then this will be a much clearer way. 12A was also mentioned. Preliminary consultation should also be dispensed with. All public consultation should be one-off. You shouldn't split them into the first, the second, and the third. You should combine them into one single public consultation. The time limit should be between 1 month and 1 month and 2 months. It will be more effective. We can also consider some planning conditions will have to be met. They will have to be met, and then they will have to apply for ETO, extension of time. There is no cap on the number of ETOs that one can apply for. If one can keep applying for an extension, that it will be meaningless. When the Town Planning Board gives comments, they should focus on the area in question. They shouldn't ask too general questions. They should specifically address the questions to the right person. And then next, Mr. Chiu Kwok Wai, Federation of Public Housing Estates. Good morning. Public houses have been compared to the relations between flour and bread. Without flour, it is difficult to build houses. To respond to the demand for houses by citizens, we are concerned about the housing supply as well. As at late December 2022, a general applicant waits for an average of 5.5 years, which is higher than the average 3 years as stated by the government. For Singleton, it remains at 3.9 years. And it takes a very long time for people to wait for housing supply. According to the progress report of the LTHS, some 127,500 people are living in inadequate housing, such as rooftop area, squatter houses, etc. We need to increase the efficiency, effectiveness, and quality of housing supply. We need to respond to people currently living in inadequate housing conditions. Construction of houses, land use are included, and we are aware that from land planning to the commission of houses, it takes at least a decade. The long-term planning, LTHS, the provision of public houses, well, it would be difficult for them to get rid of the backloaded approach. In the policy address, quite a lot of measures to expedite the provision of housing supply was mentioned. We agree with that, but then increasing land supply is equally important. It takes at least 6 years for primitive land to be turned into spade-ready land, and it takes some 3 to 4 years to build a public house. Added together, it takes around a decade or even more. It's indeed a very long time. In the bill, the government mentioned that it wanted to compress the time from 6 years to 4 years for primitive land to spade-ready land, and then from 13 years to 7 years for major projects. This is in response to the development in society. We are also aware of the bill. Some approved plans can also be partially approved. So, in case of disputes or judicial review, those amendments that are not in dispute will not be deferred. This is a pragmatic approach indeed. Quite a lot of housing projects in the past were judicially reviewed. Hence the deferment. There are 2 examples I can share with you. The first, in central and western area, and in Kwai On industrial building, they were also affected by judicial review. There were delays. In the policy address in 2021, two rather old housing villages, about 60 years old, including Mata White Estate and Saiwan Estate. The public housing projects will also be used as public housing units to accommodate some residents that have to move in. This not only lessens the impact on some residents, it is also equally important to some housing estates that have to be redeveloped. We support the bill proposed by the government this time round. We expect that this bill can streamline the procedures as well as refine some procedures in relation to land in Hong Kong. We hope that we can expedite the development of land while balancing different factors so that Hong Kong can advance. Next, Mr. Chen Yeh-chun. I have comments to make on the bill in relation to land resumption. This allows the government to have an opportunity to remove red tape, thus the faster land resumption process. In relation to the public right to know, that is a factor at play as well. We understand that the government, while resuming land, has commercial considerations. We also hope that the government can announce the design and the use in due course, especially when it comes to public use. The Chief Executive in Council can exercise this power. Bureaus will also make announcements. So I suggest that they can make announcements in one single portal to make the information public. On landfill, we hope that the function can be performed as soon as possible. There are different projects applying for funds, and I hope that the government can expedite the projects expeditiously. That's all from me today. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Next, Ms. Chow Oi-chun. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a young person in Hong Kong, and I'm concerned about the development of land. And I'd like to speak to the Secretary for Bureau. You need to tap into public views, and you need to respond to public demand. The government would like to amend the town planning ordinances and reduce the number of public consultations. Also dispense with the public consultation round. There is no factual basis. Ms. Ling, you are the Secretary for Development and you have been the Chairman of the Town Planning Board, and you should be well versed in these figures. The 3 rounds of public consultations compared with it only takes up 7%. What does this mere 7% represent? It actually represents the opportunity that the citizens in Hong Kong can take part in the Town Planning Board. It even represents the only chance that several generations of villagers can protect their own homes. Secretary, on different occasions, you mentioned the second round of public consultation in the Town Planning Board is repetitious, thus it can be dispensed with. However, with years of experience, the second round of public consultation is repetitious just because it reflects the pulse of the public. It reflects public opinions. That is because the administration did not appropriately respond to the public views raised in the first round. The government did not allay the concerns of citizens, and that is the reason. Then this leads to the second round of the public making clear their views. Public consultations are actually valuable opportunities to both the government and citizens. The threshold is very high. To ordinary citizens, probably they are not educated enough or they cannot make it to the meetings because of work. It is difficult for them to take part in every single public hearing, with information being not very transparent. So public consultations are very valuable opportunities for the general public because of their age, educational background, or their dialect. They may have to appoint other representatives to speak on their behalf. And this actually helps public hearing to take place smoothly. For the board members to tap into public views easily. This can foster community consensus, and this can even prevent further judicial review. The government has a lot of resources and powers, and the government should provide citizens with the most channels of participating in public hearings so that public voices can be heard. These are rare chances citizens can make their voices heard. Citizens should not be turned away, should not be rejected from expressing their views. The government should not do this. I understand that the housing problem needs to be solved, but then there are actually a lot of ways to expedite housing supply. Increasing manpower is one of the ways. If you will even reduce the mere 7%, then you are actually depriving citizens of their chances to make their voice heard. This also if 3 rounds of public consultations are reduced to 1 round, if there are judicial reviews in the future, this will hinder the development of land and policies. Then this is the very reason why this all started. Do not put the blame on citizens, and I hope that the government will preserve the 3 rounds of public consultation. You should tap into public views, and you should also heed the public views. Otherwise, things will just get slower.
Thank you, Ms. Chow. We have Ms. Lau Wing Yu. Good morning, everyone. We have housing problems, and that has been quite serious. We have high property prices, a small living space. These problems have been plaguing Hong Kong for a very long time, so I strongly support these amendments. The time required for a site to be turned spade ready will be reduced to 6, and in relation to other process, it will be greatly reduced from 13 years to 7 years. In other words, a lot of housing projects will materialize in a much shorter time. The amendment will reduce duplications, shorten the time of processing time. It also reduces manpower and resources spent on this process. At the same time, there will be opportunities for public discussion and participation. I have some views to voice. Can we maybe digitalize the process? Currently, when departments handle the respective task, there is no time limit. Perhaps when they handle their own part, there will be a time limit set so that people will know when the next stage will start. If there is a temporary permit, developers are allowed to start a certain advanced work before a formal approval is given, and that will save time. Thank you, Ms. Lau. Next, Mr. Lo Chun Wai. Good morning, everyone. I strongly support this amendment because it will greatly reduce duplications and shorten time. This will save resources. Government resources can be put to use in a better way. At the same time, there is sufficient discussion and participation by the public. I have been involved in a lot of town planning applications. There are lots of cases of abuse, say for example, amendment of the plans. There are public consultations again and again, and I've seen a lot of similar views expressed, whether they are objecting or supporting. Well, sometimes there are amendments made as a result, and then afterwards there will be another comments made. Sometimes these comments and representations are repetitive. So I ask everyone to make good use of their time, the government to make good use of public resources. We don't need repetition. So public consultation process can be compressed. There are lots of repetitive views expressed. It's only a photocopied form with signatures, and the signature cannot be verified. This is not fair to genuine applications. We have photocopy views and unverified signatures. And that happens whether it is supporting a view or objecting view to the application. Now there is a change. You need to be the owner of the site before you can make the application. I think it is valid. Usually, when it comes to changes of plans, there will be revitalization of old districts. Unless you live there, you won't really care. I think this has created unfairness. Regarding the compensation, we support the government's proposal. Those who are affected will have an idea about the amount of compensation. They can make arrangements and improve their own lives. But there is little detail about how it will be implemented. I hope the government will give us more details. In relation to improving clarity, well, when there are judicial review cases, the plans can still be approved partially. I strongly support that. I was involved in an application. It's a judicial review case in the Causeway Bay, Wan Chai. As a result of that review, it's been further delayed for several years. And none of the applications for rezoning can proceed as a result of this. I think the government can give us implementation details when they make the announcement, because there are a lot of questions about how it's implemented. Regarding reclamation, I hope the government will give us more explanation. This is done under the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamation Ordinance. Well, there may be some difference between that and Town Planning Gazette. You can give us better explanation. I think consultation is very important. You have to explain to us the consultation under the Foreshore Ordinance and the Town Planning Ordinance so that we will have a better understanding. Apart from these amendments, well, it seems that the government gave departments a lot of time to respond. For Section 12A applications, Sometimes applicants are asked to submit a detailed design. Your time is up. So the government can formulate guidelines for departments. Thank you. Next is our Hong Kong Foundation Senior Manager, Mr. Andy Wong. Good morning, everyone. In order to address housing and land issues, there will be Northern Metropolis, Kao Yi Chau, Artificial Island, and the Greater Bay Area. Plenty of opportunities are at our door. We support the legislative amendment, and we have these suggestions to make. We think that the direction is correct, but you need to allay public concern. Since the government has started discussion about the streamlining, the public is concerned about reduction in public consultation. Some of the proposals have been fine-tuned. Well, if necessary, say for example, if necessary, the Town Planning Board would invite representatives to attend. I hope that the Town Planning Board will ensure that the rights of participants are protected, and there will be opportunities for representations to be made. The government said that streamlining will greatly reduce development time, but the general public is still unable to understand the details. Our foundation asks government to do better in their explanation. They should give information about the development cycle after the proposal. The government should explain that public participation is ensured with the proposal. At the same time, efficiency will be enhanced and time will be saved. There is the deletion of public consultation in relation to amendment of the plans under Section 12A. If the application is approved, public consultation will take place during the OZP amendment stage. We agree with that, but we think that it should take place during the Section 12A application so that the Town Planning Board can consider these views at an early stage. If the application is approved under 12A, there is no need to have another round of public consultation. Well, this can reduce the chance that applicants will have to make a fresh application if there is a rejection of the application. This will increase uncertainty. We want to say that in order to ensure steady land supply, the Development Bureau, the Transport and Logistics Bureau will have to formulate a schedule and action plan. The public will have to be informed about where and when infrastructure will take place so that there will be an orderly supply of spade-ready sites for housing to be produced. There are a number of temporary measures in the past few years. It has caught everyone off guard. If everything is done in an orderly manner, there can be a steady supply of manpower so that projects like the Artificial Island and the Northern Metropolis can be implemented in an orderly manner. We think that there should be KPIs set every year for different bureaus. There should be similar action plan for social welfare as well as health care. Or everything should fall in place and work together to make optimum use of social resources so that Hong Kong can take off again with Artificial Island, Northern Metropolis, and the GBA. We have heard all the views from individuals and deputations. Let's first hear from the Secretary. We have members waiting to speak. We have Mr. Siu Ka-fai, I myself, Mr. Andrew Lam, and Mr. Chen Siu Hong, also Ms. Doreen Kwong as well. If you want to speak, please press the request to speak button. Let's hear a brief reply from the Secretary. I might repeat what I've said in the first session, but I'll try not to do that. Some speakers say that they support our proposals, but they say that since there is a reduction in rounds of public consultation, we should do our publicity better in the first round. Regarding land resumption, we should ensure that information will reach stakeholders and people who are affected. There are specific suggestions made, say for example APIs or special sessions or time dedicated to this on radio stations and TV stations. Some think that our proposal, in particular town planning process, deprive the public the right to participate. I'd like to stress that this is not the only chance for the public to participate. Prior to the town planning process, there are public consultations, say during the rezoning or public projects. There are public consultations that are quite extensive. When the project goes into the process of town planning, some people say that if stakeholders are unable to give authorization for someone else to attend, their right to speak will be taken away. Well, using today as an example, you understand. If 30 people have signed up, we want to hear these 30 views instead of just one. If one person has received authorizations from the 30 people, then the one person will speak. That's why we have proposed to change the authorization arrangement. We want to hear from the horse's mouth their views. There are concerns about Section 12A applications. We've changed the current practice. For future applications for amendment apart from the government, which always have the right to do so, anyone else currently can make the application. Under our proposal, apart from the government, landowner of private land with any percentage of ownership will be able to make the application, or it can be made by an authorized person of the landowner. If it's government land, the landowner is the government. Well, if it's not the government that makes the application, then it has to be done with the consent of the government. There are also some partners of the government. They can always make the application, say the housing authority. They are in charge of public housing production. Sometimes they would like to make amendment applications. The URA, the Urban Renewal Authority, is also the same. They should have the right to make amendment applications. There are views saying that this will reduce the chance for the general public to make the application. Looking at international examples, this is not the mainstream approach. In some places, it's only the government that can make the application. In others, the approach is similar to our proposal. So this is the middle ground. We have, on a number of occasions, spoken publicly. We might have made some changes, but administratively, we will provide opportunities for people to make applications. If need be, the government will take up the application. And if the government does not accept the request, they may we may explain that we have received some requests, but it's not time to do that. We will address that by administrative means. Regarding land resumption, we are aware that some speakers are concerned about public power. Say we resume the land for a specific purpose and later we want to change it. We will follow up with members as to how we can enhance transparency and participation of former owners. Just now, some speakers asked us to give more explanation about the relationship between reclamation and plan making. Under our proposal, when reclamation starts, we will have to start statutory process under the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamation Ordinance. There is a statutory process in the ordinance. We have to complete it. If we want to build anything on the land reclaimed, well, there is the outline zoning plan stating the land use before we can actually build anything. But it doesn't mean that the government can, without any idea or purpose, reclaim land. It's just like the Kauitao artificial island. We have to make specific proposals explaining why we need to reclaim land and what the land will be used for. We will ensure that there is public discussion, and we will finish with the legislative amendment before we proceed. Using the same example, say we will start reclaiming land at the end of 2025. The first site will appear in 2027. Before that, the OZP will at least have been materialized or even completed. So you can't say that there is no specific purpose before we reclaim land.
開放俾
The floor is now open to electoral members to put questions to the government. Members, you can put questions to the individuals and deputations or also all the government officials. First, we'll start with Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Madam Chair. This public hearing is the first one since the COVID and the improved electoral system. There are people bad-mouthing Hong Kong, saying we don't have free speech anymore. But then we have people here who can speak their mind. I thank everyone, individuals and deputations, for attending the hearing today. And I think the government has noted their comment. The bill here is on development, town planning, lands and works. The goal is to compress the time frame so that we can put buildings on site more quickly and people get a sense of happiness. So I support this direction. In fact, many people today have spoken in support of the amendment. As we compress the time frame, how do we protect private property rights and how do we balance that with the right of participation? That's an area of focus. On both sessions, the Secretary for Development said this. For the town planning process, representatives used to be able to hire their own representatives, but with this proposal, this may change. The Secretary for Development was saying she would like to see the representatives attending hearings in person instead of having one representative speaking on behalf of, say, 30 people. I agree. We need diverse voices. But then you may have someone who owns a site but this person has limited education, someone of advanced age, and this person may even struggle with putting together a written submission. This person may also have mobility impairment. The government needs to consider what to do about these cases. The government wants to stamp out abuse, but what if you have an old lady? There are ways to plug loopholes, but then you have to consider special cases. Secretary for Development. Under special circumstances, the Town Planning Board can allow a representative to appoint someone else to attend a hearing on their behalf. So after this bill is passed, the Town Planning Board will have to formulate rules on attendance at hearings. We will talk to the Town Planning Board and discuss the point raised by the member. Madam Chair, I still have a minute to go. I still have 1 minute left. Does any individual or deputation here wish to put further questions to the Secretary? Put up your hand. I can give my minute to you. This gentleman over here, any comments? People are unclear about the bill. What I want to say is that after the bill is passed, the government should explain the law to people in different ways, just so people get a clear picture of what to expect in areas where land resumption is about to happen. There will be fewer chances for people to voice their views, so they need to seize every chance where they can state their views. So how do we make sure the message reaches those audience? That's what I want to say. Madam Chair, for landowners or operators on a site to be affected by resumption, we put out notices in those areas. For landowners, we send letters to the registered address of a landowner. Putting up notices on site is also an option. Experience shows that we have to take a variety of means. A landowner may be outside Hong Kong. The address is not the address with the Lands Department. In such cases, problems come up. So in these cases, you need notices in the area or informing the landowner by other means. I have two questions for you, Secretary. Many people are concerned the government is trying to go ahead with reclamation before planning. But you said there will still be consultations under the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamations Ordinance. My question is, what if your reclamation does not happen at the foreshore or at the seabed? Take the example of the Central Waters. That's an example where it's neither the foreshore nor the seabed. So that ordinance is no good. And for the consultation under the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamations Ordinance, how will the consultation happen? Just then, we heard from someone, Mr. Lam from a surveyors group. He said, professionals are consulted, but that's upstream work. So does that mean that professionals are consulted very early on by the government, and then a consensus is reached between the government and the professionals. Of course, the views from the professionals matter, but that's not fair to the general public. Professionals get to be consulted first. But there are other people who may be less educated, they're less informed, they don't get to put their views across, so they are at a disadvantage. For the secretary, under your revised arrangements for consultations, for those less educated with mobility impairment, how can you ensure that they can be part of the consultations instead of being shortchanged? Madam Chair, for nearshore reclamation or reclamation in the central waters, as long as it's reclamation, it's subject to the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamations Ordinance. For this ordinance, we have to go through Gazetto, and then over the next few months we receive the representations. And then we also have other ordinances, roads use, works use, compensation ordinance. We align all those objection handling procedures, we process the objections, and then we submit the information to the Executive Council for consideration. Just then, a speaker mentioned upstream work, public engagements, that is. We can give you a recent example for the Khao Yichao Artificial Island and the Chuan Area 137. There will be development. This is the kind of upstream work that I'm referring to. Apart from briefing the panels at LegCo, we also talk to district councils. We also set up appointments with local residents. We also meet with the professional bodies and chambers of commerce. The kind of people we talk to and the scope of the development and the scope of consultation very much depend on the scope of development under question. For Chuan Area 137, we work through LegCo members to meet with local residents. Local residents may want to have a smaller scale sessions with the government. We also talk to local district councillors. This is the kind of upstream work. The public is involved. So it's not the case that we only talk to the professional bodies. Secretary, there are consultations for each ordinance. Can you put together a table for us to compare and contrast the different consultations? Next, Mr. Andrew Lam. I'm eager to hear from the deputations and individuals attending the hearing today. I want to hear from 3 of them in particular. 3 individuals or deputations. The government has provided a reply. Do you have any further views and comments? The first is Mr. Ronald Yip. The second one is Mr. Nip Hin Ming. The third one is Mr. Andy Wong from our Hong Kong Foundation. I've heard your comments, but now that the government has offered a response, I want to see if you have anything further views, comments on the government's response. Let's start with Mr. Ronald Yip. Mr. Yip, could you speak into the microphone, please? Am I coming through? Yes. As I said, I welcome this amendment. I have just listened to the Secretary for Development's response. I'm an architect by profession. I see major improvement under this proposal, so I don't have further questions myself. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Mr. Nip Hin Ming. My focus is the Section 12A applications. People will no longer get to lodge representations under Section 12A applications. It's only after the TPB accepts the amendment and then people get to lodge representations if this bill goes through. If I'm the applicant, I want to get a sense of what constraints and what objections there will be early on. I don't want to wait till almost the final stage and then I hear all those objections. I'm worried that the TPB may be persuaded by the objections and then decides to reject my application and asks me to submit an application afresh. This could well happen. I agree that we need to shorten the processing time. Comments come in and then we have further representation. If I submit a comment and the TPB accepts, can I become a representative automatically instead of having to lodge another representation? That will save work for the TPB. When you have someone who decides to jump in, all of a sudden you let them do the representation. My point is, let's not leave things till almost the very end. If it doesn't work out well, then that means more work for everyone else. Madam Chair, can I get the government to respond to that particular concern? Madam Chair, indeed, I have not addressed that point. There's a reason for this proposed change to the Section 12A applications. For plan making, we want to be able to complete the statutory procedure in one step. First, the proposal, then representations, then public hearing. Instead of having to do this step or do this part twice, just then our Hong Kong Foundation proposed merging the two steps. Our Hong Kong Foundation proposed bringing forward the consultation. So when the application comes in, you have the representations and then you do the comments. We're happy to study in greater detail this suggestion from our Hong Kong Foundation. As for Mr. Nip's comment or suggestion, say you have the first round, you or your organization lodges a representation, we deal with that. And then you do another round of representation, you won't see much saving of time. Next, Mr. Chen Siu-hong. Madam Chair, I share Mr. Andrew Lam's view. It's a rare opportunity for us to hear from the individuals and deputations attending the hearing today. I can see the views put forward today boil down to several points. We had 2 Bills Committee meetings. In fact, the views we heard today are mostly similar to the points we discussed at the Bills Committee meetings. So I look forward to working through these points with the government. Just then, Mr. Nip from Kadui Farm and also Ms. Wong from the Hong Kong Bird Watching Society both focused on conservation. The written submission from the Hong Kong Bird Watching Society in particular expresses its concern about people damaging the environment and then going ahead with development. There are concerns that it's not appropriate to have reclamation before planning. We get it. There are concerns about damages to environment. The submission says for sites of higher ecological value, all rural areas and all farmland should be designated as regulated areas. So why should all those sites be covered? There's another suggestion, is to bring forward the material date to the date of the first outline zoning plan. Is it feasible? I want to hear from you. Now, after the individuals respond to my questions, can the Secretary for Development jump in? There are concerns about merging the 3 rounds of representations into just 1 round. After all, people worry this will deprive them of the chance to take part in representations. Mr. Nip brought up cases, examples. Someone jumps in with new changes if the TPP accepts the change, and then other people won't get to comment on the change. Will that become a loophole? Will that lead to more cases of judicial review? I would like a response from the Secretary for Development. The Secretary made it clear she's not worried about people taking part in the process, but then she created the impression that she's reluctant because she said government officials needed time to prepare for representations. More public participation is more in line with what people want. You can have a very quick round if you do a second round. I would like a response from the government on this point as well.
好，邊位回應先？
Who'd like to reply first? Mr. Nip or Ms. Wong? You can tell us your views. On the loophole, we hope that we can cover all areas in the countryside, and that is in relation to the use of land, including conservation area, CPA green belt, and agricultural zone. In general, these areas are facing threats according to the current regulations. People in the community level will have expectations. Some may reduce the value of the relevant area, the ecological value of the area, and there is no clear-cut definition from the administration, which will give rise to other loopholes, and this will also lead to other behavior that cause damage to the environment before planning. There are also recent examples. Some wetlands have been damaged. Ecological value is not the only criterion, but the original intent of the land planning should be the standard. Hence, this will not give rise to other expectations or destroy and then plan. Next, Mr. Louis Long. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm grateful to the deputations and citizens who make it to the public hearing today. The impression I've got from the public hearing today is that for the streamlined procedures and public engagement are placed in an opposition position, as public engagement will lead to longer procedures, but this is actually not the case. I'd like to ask the deputation, as members of the public, as participants, what kind of opinions you can give the administration to allow them to tap into the community views without affecting the procedures. You can put up your hand if you wish to speak. The one from Kaduri Farm. If you have my submissions, page 4. For Dongchong Extension Area, OZP, I used the explanatory statement. The first date, the 24th of April 2015, the Development Bureau said that the Town Planning Board had to prepare for this plan. When it was released to the public for consultation, it had been 8 months. But then you can see the public consultation involved 2 months of public consultation, followed by 3 weeks of public comments. That is a period for the public to comment on the submissions. 2 months and 3 weeks will bring us to 20 months. Can we advance the work? For example, for the earlier 8 months, could we have already started the work? You could have gone to ask the professional bodies, citizens, can we advance the work this way? There will not be any criticism against the lack of public engagement on areas of ecological value. How do we protect these areas with high ecological value? The reason why we proposed zoning, we need to set higher priority. For example, Longyun is for farming. But how can we determine the ecological value of places such as Long Valley? There is no clear guideline. We can see a batch of zoning such as Greenbelt, SSSI, etc. Compared with other places, probably they are of higher ecological value. I do not expect that you have to protect every single site. For agricultural area, for Greenbelt, I hope that you can accord higher priority. Nor do I expect that all agricultural areas are high in ecological value, but then you have to discuss with different sectors, different professional bodies, or even the academia. We can see a lot of events of damage followed by planning. A plot of land is damaged overnight. Punishment serves no purpose. The plot of land has already been damaged. You need to talk to groups as soon as possible. And the zone I mentioned was for your reference. We still have a little bit of time. Who would like to speak? Then, the gentleman over there. Speaking to the microphone. I can share a bit more. The focus is how to have effective public engagement. Public consultation is an art. We have different meetings revolving around different measures. We should separate them into different groups: professional bodies, stakeholders, non-stakeholders, the public. There should be different brackets of people. It will not be an easy task. As a member said, do not treat all opinions as criticisms. If we do not see them as criticisms, is it possible for us to combine these meetings? Some may think that professionals only speak for their own professional interest, but this is not always the case. In our professional training, we also take into account public interest. So why do we not combine all the groups of people? Their comments may not necessarily be negative. If some topics are not that sensitive, we can discuss together. We can put our head together. There will be fewer meetings, and everyone will have a chance to speak. Will that be more effective? For some sensitive issues, sensitive talks, for example, may be needed, but that is not applicable to all issues. Is it necessary to hold dozens of meetings or even over 100 meetings? Can we combine all the meetings so that it will be easier to hold meetings, to tap into public views? Next, Mr. Lam San Kang. Mr. Xu said, well, what he said actually echoed what I said. The Secretary said with flexibility that guidelines could be issued, but I think that they are not necessary. Mr. Xu had 1 more minute, and he gave his 1 minute to the public. Mr. Louis Long also gave his time to attendees of the meeting today. We have already limited those who can speak. Only those with property rights can, well, speak. There is constraint in time. That will not extend the proposed streamlined procedures. There are time constraints, and that is enough. The resumption of land has to do with public interest. But we are concerned that without this public interest, there will be another public interest. So can we make it clear what public interest means? It may be very general. It may be very extensive. It may be more complex to do so, but then we may give opportunities to those who had the title to express their views. Secretary. As to the observation of Mr. Lam, I'd like to clarify. From town planning procedures to the public hearing, it is not the case that those with the title can speak. Well, not only these people can speak, all other people can also provide written submissions. After providing written submissions, then they have the right to attend a public hearing. I'd like to clarify this point. On time limit, isn't it enough when we impose a time limit? If that person does not make it to the public hearing, a representative will speak for 10 minutes. 10 minutes as well. There is no additional time. We hope that in the public hearing we will be able to hear the representative straight from him. The authorized representative are probably concerned groups. When they are here, they speak on the same stance. Not necessarily the person who wrote the written submissions. Is it the best solution? Apart from time consideration, we also need to be fair. It is important to make sure that we really hear something straight from the horse's mouth from the representative. For authorized representative, these may be exceptional cases, but then we still encourage the representative, the person who writes the written submissions, to attend the public hearing. And this is on the basis of our experience in the past. Well, my second question is left unanswered regarding public use. For the arrangement nowadays, when the Executive Council accepts it is a public use, the government will be authorized to resume the land. When the Executive Council gives the green light, it may be based on a particular public use. For example, the construction of public housing. When it is not implemented, the government carries on with other uses, so the plot of land will not be left idle. Does the original owner have the opportunity, now that there is a change in the public use? We are willing to delve into how we can change the wording in the legislation in the committee. After the four members have spoken, we will bring this section to a close. 4 minutes each. Ms. Doreen Kong, Dr. Wendy Hong, myself, and Mr. Louis Long. Ms. Doreen Kong, 4 minutes. I'd like to ask Ms. Chow, throughout the consultation, you mentioned 7%. How did you arrive at the figure of 7%? Mr. Nib, Ms. Wong from the Hong Kong Bird Watching Association, and Ms. Chow. Right now, Section 12A in Town Planning Board. If we want to shorten the hearing, it is actually across the board. Whether major or minor, there is only one hearing. As I can see, different countries around the world, their hearings will depend on the complexity, which is dependent on the number of people involved, the size of the area, etc. They will not handle the procedures across the board. So how do you make of the current across-the-board approach? For example, if there is a smaller area without much planning issue, we also have one public hearing. But then for other major works, we also have one hearing. What is your opinion on this? Ms. Chow. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Member. How did I arrive at this figure? I checked the cases in relation to the development of Greenbelt area in the past decade, when the government indicated the intention from that period to the completion of the statutory procedures, that is, when the Executive Council has approved the plan. I compared the time taken between the public consultation and the end. The time of the public consultation only took up 7%. I understand that there are quite a lot of disputes surrounding the green belt, the green area. I'd like to respond to members' question. The fact is that for these rezoned areas, the government only put up a notice on the door of citizens informing you of the demolition of the construction. the government is actually not asking citizens to express their views. This is the fact. So there is indeed a very high threshold, as the government is not encouraging you to express your views. Instead, the government is simply informing you that we will come to resume the land. Mr. Liu, please.
你好，
I was mulling over your question, but it's difficult to give you a general answer. It may be a small site, but of high ecological value. From my experience, if there is a Section 12A application, usually it's a larger site. I'm from a green group. Of course, I am concerned about sites with high ecological value. Say the wetland buffer area, there are proposals to construct tall buildings. I am very concerned naturally for these sites. In the urban area, there can be 12A applications, but I don't have any experience to comment on them. Regarding the 12A application, if it's done at the very end, there is no reason for that it should be done at the outset. There will be plenty of assessments submitted. We can read the assessment and then comment on them. If the amendment is successful, and it's only then that we make representations, do we have a chance to read these assessments? A lot of our comments are issues left out, missed in these assessments, and our views can be taken into account by the board. I don't know whether we have a chance to have access to these assessments at that stage. Ms. Wendy Hong, thank you. I was going to ask about the 7% mentioned by Ms. Chow. She has already explained. Well, now I want to ask if the administration thinks it's accurate. In the last session and this session, they talk about the risk of judicial review. Has the administration assessed the risk? How high is it? Secretary. In relation to the time, as we've said in public, for a large project, we expect that from primitive site to spade, it will be reduced from the 13 years to 7. For smaller projects, it's 6 years to 4 years. Apart from the time taken by statutory processes, there is indeed a lot of time devoted to upstream work. When a site turned into a spade-ready site, is not about a statutory process. There is also detailed site investigation and feasibility studies. The speakers are rather fair. When it comes to amendments made, there are work done upstream, and that process can be compressed as well. In Sentin Technopole and the Northern Metropolis, we have actually sped up time spent on feasibility study. In the past, we have broken them down into different stages, but now we haven't done that. We have, within 1 or 2 years, reported to the LegCo, and we told them about some parallel process carried out in tandem. Of course, we have the duty to shorten these processes. However, when it comes to the statutory process, the time taken by public hearing, the percentage out of the time taken for a site to become spade ready, yes, it's a small percentage. Our objective is to streamline processes. Each process is interlinked. If we say that, well, each process takes a very small time, and let's leave them, then in the end we will not be able to reach the goal to streamline processes. Apart from looking at the time taken, we have to ask ourselves, are there justifications for these changes? If they're justified or reasonable, then we have to be bold enough to make them. We should not just look at the minimum time saved and decide that we should leave them. Any follow-up? I think the question about judicial review has been answered. Regarding judicial review, well, anything the government does is subject to judicial review. Most important thing is that we're clear about the objective and the direction, and whether we have gone through proper discussion and whether we have followed the due process. Of course, there is the Bills Committee to gatekeep. Today's public hearing is a good chance for us to explain. It's now my turn. I would like to ask Ms. Wong from the Bird Watching Society. Sites of high ecological value, of course, they have to be conserved. Lantau Island. There is a general policy, conservation to the north and development to the south. Of course, for sites to be conserved, there is a high ecological value. Say, for example, there is an area, some conservationists said that there are some special species of fish in that brook. Work cannot take place because of sludge. As a result, there is inundation. And in Sublong, there are campsites, even though it is a site of high ecological value. In the past 3 years, because of the epidemic, Hong Kong people couldn't travel. People need leisure facilities, whether they are campsites, beaches. Sometimes it involves sites that needs to be conserved. Do you think that a balance has been struck? I think about the brook maybe is for Mr. Nip to answer. You mentioned about campsites. Because of loopholes in the planning process, a lot of private developments don't have to go through the planning process to put the sites into different uses. That's why over the years we have asked for a process to be involved. We need to ensure public participation to ensure that whatever the use, it meets the need of the environment and the community. We need regulations and rules. You can't say that because we need leisure facilities, we should allow these activities to take place without any restrictions. With a due planning process in place, sites of high ecological values can be saved from damaging activities. Sorry, I have limited time. Campsites does not necessarily affect adversely the ecology. Well, if there is no need to go through a planning process, why do you require one? Because for campsites, it has to be examined by the Home Affairs and Fire Services. For Sublong, many years ago, people camped there. In recent years, there is illegal filling, and some caravans are parked there. Under the current regulation, there is insufficient power for enforcement, and there is no process required. In relation to the river, perhaps we will hear from Mr. Nip for Hampton. We are the Kadori farm. We are concerned about conservation of rivers or brooks. We've seen government projects causing serious contamination in river. We have contacted the Drainage Services Department because it's about the dredging work, desilting. It's not just about the EPD, the Environmental Protection Department. We met with a different department as well. There is also a notification mechanism in place. When they carry out work, they will contact us to seek our views. For sites that are without high ecological value, we ask them to just follow the statutory procedure. Even for desilting, there are requirements under the law. About Hampton, I think that desilting work has been conducted and they have notified us in advance. Well, for that brook, and that is Pui O, is designated by the AFCD as a brook with ecological value. And the AFCD, the Agriculture and Fisheries Conservation Department, agree that that brook should be left alone. We asked them to do the desilting work manually and not with machine, and they've done that work. We think the current mechanism is appropriate. The town planning ordinance is to bring people together for discussion as soon as possible. Next, Mr. Louis Long. I just have a quick question for the secretary. She talked about it being reasonable and that views from different parties, including natural persons, are heard. I do agree. Time should not be given just a specific body to speak. But sometimes there is a need for natural persons to speak. Say it's someone with hearing impairment. The person will need to bring along a sign language interpreter to speak for them. We have this service in Lechko. So there is a genuine need. Don't deprive their right to express their views. You don't have to write it into the law. Let the town planning board to use their guidelines to cater for these scenarios. Of course, definitely we want to go along this line. Details of implementation will be done by the Secretariat of the Town Planning Board in the form of guidelines. I believe that we will draw reference from arrangements of the LegCo, say for example, public hearings. That is in relation to cases when someone needs to have an authorized person to speak for them. Any follow-up? No. We have completed all the questions today. I thank deputations and individuals for attending. We'll have a lunch break. Please come back at 2:30.